Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome back to another World of Tanks review. This time we are taking a look at the Tier 9 Japanese medium tank, the Type 61. As usual, we're going to kick off with just a little bit of backstory, basically, for you. So the Type 61 did actually exist, and was even mass-produced. This is not one of those fictional tanks. Of course, after the Second World War, the Japanese found themselves on the losing side, and due to their position and the way that different countries finished the war, strongly or not so much, essentially the Japanese economy was not in a particularly great shape, and they had been inducted into the Western Allies. They weren't a member of NATO per se, off the top of my head, I don't think, though I'm sure if I'm wrong, someone in the comments will be quick to point out that I'm wrong. But they were an ally to the United States and to Western Europe. And of course, after the Second World War, we're getting into that Cold War period, where we have Western Europe, the United States, and some other countries, including Japan, facing off against Eastern Europe, the USSR, and kind of China in some situations. And so, as a result, the tanks that the Japanese had throughout the Second World War had generally been a little on the dodgy side. Japanese tanks have always veered towards the lighter side of things. Japan itself is quite a mountainous country, and you wouldn't necessarily say armoured land power was to the Japanese strength during the Second World War, and indeed towards the end of the Second World War and after the Second World War, tanks like the M24 Chaffee, although they were popular with their crews, they were generally considered to be inadequate against likely things like T-34-85s that the Soviets would be fielding. And so there was a program to try and give the Japanese army, or the Japanese self-defense force, a little more punch, and there was a plan to for essentially the Japanese to produce American design, so the Patton, M47 Patton. Unfortunately, this was quite expensive, and as I mentioned, the Japanese economy wasn't so hot, and a lot of countries' economies were pretty shafted after the Second World War. So the Japanese came up with their own indigenous design to kind of get around this problem. The idea was that it would be a main battle tank capable of mounting a gun that could deal with anything the Soviets might throw at them, and this was a key characteristic, it would be a lightweight tank. We're back to lightweight designs. The reason for this was because the Japanese just didn't have the financial resources to produce vast numbers of tanks, and so the idea was that you would have a smaller armoured force that could be rapidly relocated at will, and in order to facilitate that rapid relocation, they were planning to use the railway network, and so they needed a tank that was light enough that could be mounted on a train for transportation around the country. And so the design proposal, or the call, was for a tank weighing no more than 25 tons and mounting a 90mm gun. Now, weighing no more than 25 tons in tank terms, in particular in post-war tank terms, that's quite a light machine. Now, the tank was designed to be as heavily armoured as that weight allowance would, well, allow, but 25 tons isn't a lot of weight to work with, and so inherently the resultant Type 61 main battle tank was kind of light on the armour side. These things were mass-produced, and they were used by the Japanese Self-Defense Force until being replaced by the Type 74, I believe it was, off the top of my head. And this was, as I say, the Type 61 was an indigenous Japanese tank design, but you can see it's kind of been heavily influenced by American and Western tank design philosophy. So, that's the history out of the way. Let's have a look and see what we get in game. Bearing in mind we are up here at Tier 9, this is the penultimate tier before you get to the big boys at Tier 10. So, what do we get? Well, we have a tank with 1700 hit points. Bearing in mind this is a medium tank, that is absolutely fine. If we were to compare it with some of its competitors, for example, let's just get rid of the Japanese filter there. 1700 for the Type, the Patton has 1700, the Centurion has 1720, the T-55A has 1700, and here you can see the Leopard prototype is on 1550, but bear in mind that's with the stock turret, so that's not really a valid comparison. So 1700 really is par for the course, which is absolutely fine. The rest of the survivability stats are not particularly great. We are going to have a look at the armour in a bit more detail shortly, but just immediately looking at the numbers, 55mm of frontal hull armour, 35 on the side, 25 on the rear, and on the turret, 70, 60, 35. That's kind of giving you the idea that this is not going to be a particularly well-armoured tank. Despite the fact that the design proposal was, I believe, for a 25-ton tank, the actual Type 61 we have in-game is 35 tons. I mean, it's not uncommon for tank proposals to go over their allocated weight allowance. 604 horsepower engine, giving this thing a specific power of 17.26 horsepower per ton. For a medium tank, that's, you know, fine. It's nothing spectacular, but it's not terrible. Top speed limit of 47.6 kilometers an hour, which is okay, yeah, that's fine. Once again, not spectacular, not terrible. Reverse speed of 20 kilometers an hour, which is pretty healthy. Traverse speed of 50 degrees a second, which is rather good, though of course remember this quoted traverse speed is not the actual traverse speed you're going to see. That's going to include things like the engine power and the ground resistance values, etc, etc. But the mobility of the Type 61 is perfectly adequate. Not spectacular for a medium tank, but perfectly adequate. Concealment is not great for a tank, but again, generally speaking, the Japanese medium tanks tend to be a little on the sneakier side to make up for the fact that they have not very good armour. I mean, yeah, you can see I've got a camo crew here from the STA-1, as this is the same crew. So you are getting a little bit of camouflage there, but it's nothing to get too excited about. Base view range of 400 meters here, and base signal range of 750 meters. While both of those are pretty good, they're also getting very standard. Most tier 9 medium tanks pack very similar kind of values there. So we've mentioned briefly the armor and the mobility. Let's have a look at the firepower department. There are two guns available on the Type 61. A 90mm gun and a 105mm gun. Now the 90mm gun is the top gun from the STA-1. 12 rounds a minute, 90 rate of fire, 90mm caliber, 218 penetration, 240 alpha damage. If you're willing to dab that 2 key, that penetration goes up to 275, 0.36 dispersion at 100 meters, and a 1.7 second aim time. The gun is fairly good to aim. The fully aimed accuracy is not fantastic. The penetration is kind of lacking, although 218 is around about what tanks like the Patton and the Soviet mediums get, even with their top guns. The DPM is not bad. It's not a gun I would advise using in the long term, but as far as grinding guns go, it's not the worst, especially as pressing that 2 key does give you some pretty tasty penetration at 275. That's kind of 90mm guns for you. Like I said, I wouldn't recommend using it in the long term, but it can be a viable choice in as a grinding weapon. What you really want is this top 105mm rifled gun. This is essentially yet another copy of the Royal Ordnance L7A1 105mm gun that seemed to be used by every NATO nation under the sun. It's going to look very familiar by now to anyone who's played kind of Western Tier 9 medium tanks, or Tier 9 and 10 medium tanks. 105mm guns, 6 rounds a minute rate of fire. When this tank was introduced, that led to some pretty tasty DPM. 258 average penetration with your standard APCR rounds is very respectable. Not the highest, but perfectly respectable. 330 if you dab that 2 key and fire some heat. Alpha damage 390, 480 with HE, where your pen goes down to 53 of course, 0.36 dispersion at 100 meters, and a very mediocre 2.3 second aim time. What you get with this gun is, and I need to be a little careful here, decent alpha damage for its tier and class, though I feel I should point out 390, whilst that is by no means bad, it is certainly not the highest in class. There are a lot of tanks that share that alpha damage. Similar comments apply to the penetration. Fully aimed accuracy is not great. This is not a sniping gun. Your aim time, 2.3 seconds, is very mediocre, and when you combine that with some kind of mediocre soft stats on the gun can be a little on the derpy side. When it was introduced, this tank had the highest DPM of any Tier 9 medium tank that used these sort of 105mm guns. That is no longer the case, and this is going to become a theme with the Type 61. When it was introduced, it was good at this, but since then, power creep has been a thing, and that's kind of the story of the Type 61. It has really been the victim of power creep, but more on that later. This 105mm gun, the DPM is reasonable. You can rack the damage up at a respectable rate, provided you can hit and penetrate your targets, and that's less about the penetration of the gun and more about the rather mediocre accuracy, aim time, soft stat combination that it has going on. Other stats that I have not yet mentioned: 10 degrees of gun depression, which is very nice indeed. 13 degrees of gun elevation, which is kind of not so nice. It can let you down sometimes. In terms of, I should also mention at this point, any notable module locations. Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, there's a dirty great big engine sitting in the back of this tank. No huge surprise. Frontal fuel tanks, you need to be aware. Your driver sits here, but you have fuel tanks here. Hits to the front can and will set you on fire. Ammo rack located in the rear of the turret in this back kind of counterweight section. Again, that's not uncommon for tanks like this. Other things to be aware of: because this thing, much like the STA-1 before it, has such an elongated turret, you can occasionally find that you've unintentionally poked, say, the back of this turret out, and people can shoot you in that when you hadn't intended it. Speaking of parts of the turret where people can shoot and you didn't want them to, yeah, this suffers from, hey look, I have a giant commander's hatch syndrome, but more on that when we have a look at the armor profile of the tank. In terms of crew skills and equipment, well, I've got a fairly well-skilled crew on my Type 61 because I haven't kept any of the preceding Japanese medium tanks. Sixth Sense is pretty much essential. I would not like to play this tank without Sixth Sense. Repairs is an option, though your armor is not particularly good. And with the cooldown now on the things like the repair kit, not as important as it once was, but still not a bad skill to take. Camo can also work on this tank because, as I said, you don't really want to rely on being shot at, so another way to avoid damage, of course, is to not be spotted, though this isn't a long-range sniper, do bear that in mind. Other things like Smooth Ride, Snapshot are your friend. Safe Stowage, not a bad idea. I generally tend to take it on tanks after, just as a just-in-case measure. Bitter experience has taught me that can be painful otherwise. I got ammo racked, and by ammo racked I mean goodbye head, in my FCM the other day. That was kind of irritating, for example. Brothers in Arms, your standard crew skill type stuff. In terms of ammunition here, you can see I've got 25 rounds of APCR, 5 rounds of high explosive anti-tank, and 2 rounds of high explosive ammunition. That's another thing. Your ammo capacity on this tank is kind of lacking. 32 rounds of ammunition doesn't go that far. Especially when the gun isn't particularly reliable. This is not a very nice combination, so that can be awkward. I do not recommend taking many rounds of high explosive. I have 2 for the odd cap reset and things like that. And also to deal with things like high-tier Swedish medium tanks where you can't reliably hit the weak point, and the auto-bounce armor, and not high enough caliber to overmatch, and so you end up relying on HE or heat in order to go through. But there we go. Consumables, I have your standard set: small first aid kit, small repair kit, manual fire extinguisher. You could swap either of those out for a large version. Some people I know are going to want to take out the fire extinguisher and swap it out for onigiri, which is the food consumable. Frontal fuel tanks is all I'm going to say to that. Frontal fuel tanks. Yeah, you can probably tell what I think about that. If you can't, I don't think it's a particularly good plan, but I leave that up to you. I guess you might be able to get away with it if you had a good firefighting crew on this tank, but that wouldn't be my first port of call for a skill. I think that's quite enough of me rambling on for now, so I'm just going to quickly show you the armor profile, and then we will jump into some gameplay. Right then, time to have a look at the armor. You know what, I'm not even going to bother mentioning the rear and side armor. It is so bad, HE can penetrate it. I mean, seriously. 30 millimeters of side armor. I mean, this thing can be overmatched by most guns that are going to face it. So let's just talk about frontal armor. Lower front plate, 92. Upper plate, 98. That's going to be penetrated by everything that can shoot at it. Turret, 100 and... No, that's penned. No, pen, 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 pen. Giant great Eiffel Tower sticking out the top. That's penetration central. Let's have a look at the gun mantlet. 211, still not enough. 141, no, 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 no. Oh, just there, 309. There we go. There's the odd insane angle, but you can really only rely on lucky bounces, or only get lucky bounces. You're not going to get anything else if you are using your full gun depression. The upper front plate on this tank will still be penetrated. Your giant Eiffel Tower is only marginally less visible, and the front of your turret is still pretty sucky. Short version, the armor on this tank is not very good, so don't rely on it. Let's have a look at some gameplay. Okay then, ladies and gentlemen, here we go in a tier 9 maximum game just to kick things off with. Some people may argue this is not strictly speaking top tier because we don't have any tier 7s in this match, but you know what? Nuts to it. It's a tier 9 maximum game. It's close enough. So we have got tier 9s and tier 8s to shoot at. This is an assault game here on Durpenberg, and we are on the defending team. We even have a mission running in the background for us. So, having a look at the enemy team, there are no super heavily armoured targets. The E-75, sure, has some respectable armour, but we can definitely penetrate him by aiming for weak spots and without dabbing our Tuki, or at least we should be able to. Immediately having a look at how our team is positioning themselves, get a slight sinking feeling as, for instance, our Type 4 Heavy has driven to the other side of the river and is steadily refusing to come back. I am predicting that we're going to lose our Type 4 Heavy right at the beginning of this match. I could be wrong. Maybe our team... maybe he won't die. I would love to be proven wrong. I cannot actually remember if he dies or not, so... I don't know. Now, these little sort of hills over here, you have 10 degrees of gun depression with your Type 61, and so you can abuse that, and you should abuse it at every available opportunity. This is a bit risky because, yeah, I have been spotted in cresting that ridge, and I get lucky there, okay? Hands up, I get lucky. I bounce both the CDC and a shot from the E-75. Out of curiosity, where did either of those guys hit? Can we see? Ah, there we go. One of those shots, I don't know which one it was. If you can see there, one of those shots just goes straight into our gun mantler and we get a bit of a lucky bounce. Not sure where the other one goes. Let's not worry too much about that so far. But I would like to point out that was actually a bad decision from me. I should have lost over 700 health there. So don't do that. If you get spotted approaching a ridgeline, just back off. Do as I say, not as I do. I get lucky in that particular situation, and of course I do actually find out there's an E-75 over there. Now, I didn't know there was an E-75, but of course I did know there were people in the background, and this is the aiming stats on the gun. So knowing there are people in the background, I should not have crested that ridge, as I was spotted approaching the ridge, and of course bear in mind it takes a good 3 seconds for your sixth sense to go off anyway. So once it's gone off, you've already been spotted 3 seconds ago, and so it's very dicey. We take a little bit of a risk there, but we managed to execute that CDC, and I pull back, and I haven't been shot at again. So I'm taking a couple of risks this game, and, well, it's kind of paying off here. So, just working these ridge lines. Really, that ridge line is a little too steep for me to work properly, because I have to sort of come fully over it, which is not exactly optimal. It's the thing with these ridges, they are actually pretty darn steep. Nonetheless, so far the scoreline is 2-2. Managed to kill their CDC, and they've lost their Bulldog as well. We've lost an AMX 1390 and our own Bulldog, so it's kind of evens. Our Type 4 Heavy is predictably enough complaining about his team, despite the fact that we told him right at the beginning that was a really bad place to go, and he ignored us. But, you know, stupid is as stupid does. So... the Scorpion takes the words right out my mouth, so I'm not gonna say any more about the subject. Still trying to work these ridge lines. You do not have any armor, so you do not want to be the one pushing up here at all. Now, there is a FV4202 over there with that Type 4 Heavy. Please pay attention in the post-battle results to the performance of that FV4202, and you might have a pretty good idea about how those guys aren't dead yet. Spoiler alert, the FV4202 went man mode on them, which is pretty impressive. Finally managed to spot out that E75. It looks like we haven't been spotted for our trouble. Take a shot at that E75, not fully aimed. Take his tracks off. Looks like he might be looking at me. I really want to get out of here, but I still haven't been spotted. So I put one shot into the side of that E75, and he decides to get out of dodge. Doesn't look like he used his repair kit, unfortunately, but there we go. This is where that camo skill comes in use. We were at kind of mid to long range there. It wasn't a super long range shot, but mid to long range. And we did not get spotted, which allowed us to put shots into that E75 without taking return fire. Hello, Mr. Jagdpanther, how are you today? Apparently you're good enough to bounce my shot, which is kind of sad. Now, as you can see, that Type 4 and the FV4202 are still alive, and in fact, Lorraine has gone over there to help out. Have a blind shot there at that Jagdpanther 2. Once again, remember that FV4202 is a very large reason of why those guys are not yet dead. Pick up the kill on the Stritzwang and pick up a little bit of assistance damage on that guy as well, which is nice. IS-3 is coming around to see what he can do. He's getting kind of shot up for it though. He's now fired, so I'm going to take advantage of him having fired. We aim for his tracks, we hit his tracks, we put a shot in, and he takes pain. This is all very bread and butter for the Type 61, if I'm going to be honest. There's nothing spectacular about these games, but then I try not to pick spectacular games for reviews. It's all just games that are kind of showing, hopefully, what the tank does. And this has all been facilitated by getting lucky a little bit earlier on. Well, I say it's all been facilitated. I don't think... So I might have lost 700 health right back at the beginning of the game. I don't honestly think I'd have played this that differently if I had lost that health, because I'd have still had 1,000 health to play with. And I haven't been shot since, although we get lucky again. Once again, a shot into the gun mantlet. So, the gun mantlet can bounce things for you. You should not rely on it, but this match so far, it's what? That's about 1,250, 1,220 damage that my tank has saved me from. I got a little bit lucky this game. This is what you can do with a little bit of luck. Had I been unlucky, I'd have been on about 500 health at this point. So, you have to be careful. Jagdpanther 2, no, let's just spot him out. But then again, had I been on 500 health at this point, I'd have still done 3,000 damage. And 662 assistance damage, which in a tier 9 medium tank is not a bad result. So it still would have been a match that I could have shown you as part of a review. Wouldn't have changed things too much. I get lucky again. Those Germans are having some serious problems with their 128mm guns, aren't they? That guy's hull down, I'm never going to penetrate that, but at this point I'm like, screw it, let's just go forwards. I might take a hit for this, and indeed I do, but it allows our WZ to come up behind him and kill him. So, I thought that was worthwhile trade. There's only 3 of them left at this point. Our Type 4 Heavy is still alive, thanks in no small part to the heroic efforts of our FV4202, as I keep mentioning, because I really do want to highlight that FV4202 was a boss. All the enemy tanks are over on the other side of the map, so let's just go and join them. Going to speed this up a little bit, because whilst this tank is not slow, it's also not super fast. And it does have a little distance to go in this particular scenario. So, going to the other side of the map here, Tiger 2 dies. Just the Super Pershing and the Udes remaining. And there is the Udes. Put a shot in. Really would have liked to have taken out the guy's track at this point. I'd like you to pay attention to my only 10 rounds of APCR remaining as well, by the way. 9 now. Imagine if this had been a more extended game. And we've generally been aiming our shots, and we've been hitting most of our shots. We're up to around about 4k damage. But imagine if we had to seriously carry this game, ammunition could be a genuine concern. Udes is the only one remaining. I go straight through his armor because his armor is made of paper. That one tracks him, someone else kills him, and that is the match. There we go. We're going to go and take a look at the post-game stats. Results for that one then: first class mastery, fighter, sharpshooter, shellproof, like I said we got a little bit lucky, fire for effect bruiser, and a high caliber medal. You cannot expect to bounce that many shots in the Type 61. I did that match, which allowed me to do a little bit more damage. And I don't think it would have changed the outcome of the game that much. I probably would have died on about 3,500 damage instead of making it to over 4,000. Spoiler alert, you'll see the damage count in a moment. But I think our team would have still won, and I still would have had a respectable game. And a game that I would probably have still used in this review just to show you what the tank does when top tier. Remember that FV4202 I mentioned? 3,282 damage from him, 1,203 base experience, well done to him. We managed 4,637 damage, 4 kills, 1,200 base XP. That Type 4 Heavy, who was moaning and whinging, managed 1,955 damage, which is still not bad, but for a Type 4 Heavy, also not that good. The FV4202 really kind of carried that flank. On the enemy team, commiserations to the Udes, approaching 3,500 damage, but it wasn't quite enough. 17 shots fired, 16 hits, 13 penetrations. The gun was relatively well behaved for that damage count, most of which was from not too long a range. This gun does not tend to work with long-range snipes. 5 hits received, of which only 1 penetrated, as I keep coming back to. We got lucky with the armor that game. You cannot normally expect to bounce 1,710 damage with your armor. 1 enemy vehicle spotted, 7 damaged, 4 destroyed, 890 assistance damage. Just a shade under 4 kilometers travelled, and we were able to make a 20,000 credit profit, even with a standard account, bearing in mind, though, if more of those shots at me had actually penetrated, as they should have done, that profit would have been significantly less. And, of course, there was our experience in about 9 minutes, so that ended up being a pretty decent match. You really don't want to get shot in the face in this tank, despite the fact that I did bounce a couple here or there. So, let's go and have a look at a game with some slightly less favourable matchmaking. Second match then, of course, is a tier 10 match. We're in a tier 9 tank. This is as close as I can get to a bottom tier game, really. This is a 3-5-7 split in the tier 10 match, so it's not as bad as the matchmaking could be, you know, if there were no tier 8s at all, but it's still us not exactly top tier. Also, the map is, well, it's not the best, it's not the worst. In the previous game, we were using a lot of ridge lines and our gun depression as much as possible. We're still going to try and do that, but it's a bit harder here on Windstorm than it is on Derpenberg. Standard game on Windstorm because there isn't any other sort of game format on this map. And we are in the northern spawn, so we're going to see what we can do. And you can see here going uphill we're doing about 35 kilometers an hour, which is okay, but it's nothing to get too excited about. WZ132 has already been spotted out, and unfortunately so have we, which is a bit of a shame. No artillery in this match, which does make life slightly easier. Because this thing is so poorly armoured, artillery does tend to like shafting you. Managed to put 1 into that bat chat, but our T-44 kind of got a little bit wrecked there. But a little bit of a spotting damage there on, I think it was the bat chat. Yes, indeed it was. Which is always nice. One thing I didn't mention in the garage, equipment. So I run my tank with a very standard equipment setup. Vert stab, optics, and a gun rammer. If you have a really badass crew and whatnot, you could happily swap out optics for vents and you'd still be up around that view range cap. But with a tank like this, I really do like to have some good view range to work with, hence I use optics on my type. Put another couple of shots there, this time into the T-34. Get a little bit lucky with that last shot. There wasn't much of his tank to hit. And really with this tank, in order to have a decent game, you do need just a little bit of luck on your side. Because, well, it's not the best tank in the world and the gun is kind of derpy. So, the enemy team have pushed quite heavily through this, through the town here. As you can see, they're really going for it. We take a couple of hits in the face there, showing more what the armor tends to achieve in this tank. And I'm trying to get some return fire in, but it's kind of awkward, and I don't want to sit there and just let them blat me in the face. That T-30, well, he flubs his shot. The T-30's gun is a bit unreliable, and he loses quite a chunk of health in the process. T-54 thinks he can try his luck. I managed to put a 105mm shell into him. And now we're kind of on the back foot here. The enemy team are pushing and pushing hard. can't penetrate the turret on an ML2, that's just not going to happen. He's got the gun depression to really give us problems here, which is a shame. Trying to back off, hoping there's no one behind me to put shots into my rear, but I don't really have that many options at this point. If there is, well, I'm screwed because I can't go forwards. I will die. A T-34, a T-32, a Patriot, WZ-132 and an ML2 would make very short work of my face. So, kind of don't want to do that. T-54, oh, actually the side of the turret on the ML2, we will take advantage of that. He has a rock-hard turret front. Side and rear of the turret, not so much. Scoreline is 3-7, this is looking decidedly bad. Coming around here, trying to take advantage of people reloading to allow us to put more shots in, and where the hell did that shell go? That's this gun for you. It really does derp out when you think, oh, I should have a good old kill there. T-30 takes out the Patriot. Although the scoreline is now 4-9, this is looking kind of dicey. Aim a shot there at the Lerva, put one into him. Don't quite kill him, but we would have needed a high damage roll in order to kill him. And our Object 140 is capping their base at this point. Unfortunately, it's not particularly difficult to get back to base on this map, and really, I mean, him capping would be fine. Let's take out that T-32. Would be fine if we actually had more than one guy in the cap. As it is, he's capping here, but, well, you could argue we really need him in the fight. We just lost our T-30 buddy there as he takes a shot in the side from that T-10. I put one into the T-10 myself, but wasn't able to dissuade him from taking his shot, and I can't poke up there anymore because, well, yeah, this is kind of dodgy. I do have a look to see if I can do anything about that T-10, but as it is, I just trade a hit in the face for nothing in return. Bad trade from me. It's the problem with this tank. If people are looking at you, you are most likely going to trade badly. Lerva, not so much. We get a bit lucky with that shot, make up for some of the other shots we've had, and we do actually get a bit lucky there as the WZ-132 only takes out our gun, which we immediately repair. Another hit in the face from that WZ though. Can we do anything about the T-10? Nope. Like I mentioned, this 105mm gun is kind of dodgy, and we lost a crew member to the WZ, who we managed to put back in. Shot there from the T-34, we put one back into him in return. T-10 is down. We're no longer capping. Our object died in the process. We are the ones being capped. The T-34 has fired, however. I have the reload on him, but a wreck gets in the way, and I don't think I can push on that T-32 any longer, which is a little bit of a shame. WZ-132, take a shot at him there, managed to make it land. There's just the two of us left, by the way, myself and this T-100 lightweight. And we're just trying to do what we can. I mean, it's not impossible. We can still win this, but we just lost the lightweight. It's me on my own. That's a shame. I killed the T-34, but that 113 that has been systematically murdering our team is probably going to come for me. I managed to put one into his lower plate, and actually it's the T-54 up on the ridgeline who manages to take me out, which is a little bit of a shame. So, there we go. That is the match in the big scary Tier 10 world. Let's go and have a look at the post-battle results once again. Here we go then. Well, we didn't get quite as lucky this match. We weren't even able to pull a win. But despite that, despite it being a defeat, we still managed third-class mastery with no heroic resistance or anything. We also managed Duelist and Fire for Effect. 4,812 damage done, actually more damage than the previous game. 3 kills, 697 base experience. We definitely carried our weight. Unfortunately, we weren't able to carry enough of the weight of the rest of our team. Object 140, T100 LT, all also had fairly decent games. On the enemy team, this was the real difference. If you look at their top tanks, that 113 just managed over 5,000 damage, which is pretty respectable, and 7 kills. And if you have a look further down the list, it's not really obvious why we lost. But essentially, they're kind of bottom end tanks. I mean, across the board, the performance of both teams wasn't too radically different. And indeed, comparing myself to their 113, it wasn't radically different either. So I think that was one of those games that just came down to some relatively fine margins. As it is, they managed to get ahead early, presumably with some, well, they had some more kills. We weren't able to quite make it up. We pulled back a little bit towards the end, so I think the damage we dealt to their team was just more spread out, and the damage they did to our team was actually taking guns out of the battle. Nonetheless, 17 shots fired, 14 hits, 13 penetrations. Again, the gun was relatively well behaved for that total damage count. Once again, about a fifth of that damage from longer range. 8 hits received, 6 penetrated, 2 did not. Now, on the one hand, that is the sort of thing you can expect with regard to the armor performance, i.e. we bounced a shot here or there, but nothing that you'd really want to rely on. On the other hand, some of those shots were from a light tank, so you shouldn't be surprised if you actually end up taking fewer shots than that before you're dead. 440 damage blocked by our armor there, and even that was a little bit on the lucky side. 10 enemy vehicles damaged, 3 of them destroyed, 657 assistance damage. We were killed in that match, so our repair costs were more considerable, and we lost, so we only made a small profit of 5,500 credits. Experience was okay again. It's on a defeat, so do bear that in mind. That match was less than 6 minutes, though. Almost 5,000 damage in less than 6 minutes, not too shabby. We were able to take advantage of people not focusing us though, which was quite nice. Anyway, that's our gameplay over, so let's go and just round things off in the garage. So, what do I think of this tank overall? I think it's honestly pretty damn painful. This is one of those tanks that has been the horrible victim of power creep. When it was introduced, the package you got was 10 degrees of gun depression, which is always nice to have. A tier 10 105mm gun, nice. Slightly limited ammunition supply, okay, fine. But you had the highest DPM of any tank mounting these sort of tier 10 type guns. Since it's been introduced, and sorry, I should also elaborate on that, when you compared it to other tanks mounting a similar kind of gun, often the Type 61 had another advantage over them. So for example, it had a better top speed than the Centurion 7/1, for instance. Since then, some things have changed. So this tank has essentially remained unchanged since it was introduced. Let's think about some of its direct competitors, and I'm thinking those tanks armed with similar type of guns. Okay, so what have we got? We've got things like the Leopard prototype, which has been buffed, the AMX-30. Some people consider it well, you could argue about whether it's a buff or a nerf because it's just changed, but most people consider what's happened to that tank a buff. You've got the Centurion 7/1, that's been buffed. You can kind of see where this is going, and so this tank has kind of been left lagging somewhat behind. It's gone from having good DPM to deeply mediocre DPM. And the problem is, without that, this tank doesn't really have a defining feature or a positive character trait. In fact, if you stack this tank within the tier 9 medium tanks by DPM, I'm going to go through each of the tanks that this actually beats and point out why that isn't such a big deal. Leopard prototype. Technically, this tank has marginally higher DPM than the Leopard prototype. The Leopard prototype also has a way better accuracy. Yeah. T54, well, okay, it only has better DPM than the T54 if you use the bad DPM gun. The good DPM gun, not so much. Skoda, T54E1, and the Batchat all have autoloaders, so it's not even really a fair comparison. They can all just take one shot to the face and then shave away most of your health. The WZ hits for 440 alpha damage and actually has some armor to work with. And that leaves the Centurion 7/1, which now actually has a higher top speed limit than the Type 61 since it was buffed, and some turret armor, meaning that it's not reliant on the soft stats as much, which are also kind of dodgy, so it can sit there aiming, use its superior accuracy, and it has some turret armor, so it can do that whilst probably not getting hit in the face. So, yeah, this tank essentially has been the victim of power creep. There is still the occasional person who likes it. For me, I really don't. In fact, I would go as far as to say that this is probably the most painful tier 9 medium tank I have had the misfortune of playing. I mean, the Patton, the M46 Patton grind, the grind itself is worse, but the tank here is just horrendous. Let's just have a quick look at the grind and see if at least it has that over the Patton, and I'm pretty sure it does, because you have this 90mm gun as a stock gun, which is not a bad gun to start with. The top engine, however, is not used with any other tank, so you're left using this engine, but this engine is not completely terrible, and that's really it. The suspension radio, of course, sure, you have to unlock, fine. The turret you need to unlock for the gun. I would personally probably prioritise getting this gun as soon as you can, because the mobility isn't too bad anyway. Overall then, I think this tank is pretty underwhelming, and I cannot recommend. Tier for tier, I would probably say this thing is... well, I found it less enjoyable than the STA one at tier 8, put it that way. We've got the STB one coming up at tier 10, which looks to be more of the same, except it doesn't have quite such a big dirty great weak spot on top of the turret, and it's actually got a little bit of turret armor. So yeah, I think that's just going to be better. So once I finish this review, I'm going to sell my Type 61, and at some point when it's on a discount, get round to buying the STB one, shove the crew in that, and hopefully have a bit more fun with it. There we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that review, possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, then by all means feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and as ever, I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.